And listen, now I want to talk about Bama a little bit. I don't hate Bama like most SEC people. I have a massive respect for what Saban did for Alabama. I don't know. I don't hate Alabama like everybody else does. And I do think that Alabama got screwed.
So tell me why, because we're going to argue about this, which is fine with me.
I know we're going to argue.
Why did they get screwed?
And I will preface what I'm about to say by the fact that I don't think anybody with 3 losses has a massive argument for being left out of the playoffs, and I do, when it was 4 teams, 5 and 6, we're going to throw a fit. When there's 12 teams, 13 and 14 are going to throw a fit. If we go to 64 teams, 65 and 66 are going to throw a fit. There is not a scenario where we fix this, where there's not somebody that complains at the end of the day. I do think having 3 losses makes it, less of a great argument. But if we're arguing between SMU and Alabama, while I don't know that there's a perfect answer, I still think we picked the wrong one here. I think Alabama has better wins than SMU does. I think they play a tougher schedule. And I think at some point, we have to reward these tough schedules. Otherwise, what is the point in playing them? The SEC beats up on each other all year, every single year. And then we get in a situation where we get, all SEC championship games, which has happened several times in the last decade. We get these bowl games where the SEC is dominant. It's because we play harder schedules during the regular season. But if you're not going to give a nod to that, what is the point of some of this challenging outside conference scheduling that we're trying to do?
So what makes it tough is that it is so subjective. And if Alabama had lost games, what's tough to me is to use the strength of schedule argument. Alabama, to me, would have needed to lose some of their tougher games, right? And Alabama's problem, to me, is not that they lost to the Georgias or to the good teams that they played. They lost to the bad teams. Like, they absolutely show the propensity to go out and lay complete stinkers. And to me, if you would have lost to a Georgia, we could buy that. Oh man, they lost to, it's almost like losing good games is more important. And so that's where I
lost to Oklahoma that did them in.
Absolutely. And even Vandy,
Vandy, it's different.
Vandy was better than we thought they were this year for sure. But if Alabama just takes care of business as a double-digit favorite, Vandy doesn't go to a bowl game. Like, right. Vandy's 5-7. And same thing with Oklahoma. As a double-digit favorite, Alabama went and got absolutely blanked. Now, if that game happens early in the year, probably helps Alabama some because they finish on a winning streak. But I think that that's what's tough is you got blanked as a double-digit favorite against a bad team. Again, if Oklahoma loses that game, which they should have, Alabama should have won that game. Oklahoma doesn't go to a bowl game. And so this idea of, I think they would beat SMU in a head-to-head matchup. They'd probably be a favorite. But I also think that right now South Carolina would beat Alabama in a head-to-head matchup. And so why? And I know they played head-to-head, but Ole Miss beat South Carolina head-to-head matchup by more than Bama did. And so who do you put it at some point? The wins and losses
and SMU though, if you're down to those two, that Bama has more losses, but also has the better resume. Strength of schedule wise. You look at those two teams. If I'm on that committee, the next thing I do is say, okay, if those two teams play 10 times, what do I think the outcomes would be? And truly, I'm asking you that question. These two, Alabama and SMU, play 10 times. What's the outcome?
I think Alabama wins more than they lose.
Right. And I think that is important.
But the problem is the results on the field have to matter some too. And that's where the system,
Alabama's schedule. Do they only have one loss?
But it's not. But I don't think you can
schedule. Do they have any loss?
Probably because SMU played better teams than Vandy and Oklahoma. So, yes, I would say they probably have a couple,
But does
but
SMU beat Georgia? Do
but
they
here's
beat LSU? Do they
do they
beat
beat Vandy?
Missouri?
Do they beat Oklahoma?
South
But here's the
Carolina?
problem. If you hypothetical the whole thing out, at some point the results on the field do have to matter. And you're right. But the problem is there's no perfect way to do it.
Yeah.
Because yes, Alabama definitely played a tougher schedule than SMU. There is no doubt about it. I haven't seen one person argue that. But at some point, your losses to Vandy and Oklahoma have to matter. Like you have to take care of your own business before worrying about what somebody else's business is. And what I would wonder is
It's
at
JV.
11-1, are this hypothetical game of I think Alabama would win if the two teams played head to head on Saturday at a neutral site. Yes, you can hypothetical that away and say that that's the case. But then I also would I would hypothetical that other teams would win too, right? Like I would hypothetical that Bama would probably beat Notre Dame and that they would probably beat Indiana. But then at some point you have to make the results on the field what matters. And that's what's tough to me
But
is
until you have parity in schedules, you have to have the ability as the committee, unless we're going to just go to a BCS formula, which listen, I had zero problem with the BCS formula. I would go back to that in a heartbeat. I think people sitting around, watching it on TV without even beer or chicken wings, by the way, is an asinine way to do this when there's actually a computer model that we can use to figure it out. But if the schedules are not equal, then you shouldn't weight them equally. I don't think it's fair to say all wins and losses are the same because they are not.
and I'll say this, I don't think the committee did. I think at 11-1, they said 11-1 is more valuable to us than 9-3 with the losses being against Vandy and Oklahoma. Like to me, that's what the committee did. They said, because if it had been 10-2 versus 9-3, I think you saw that with Alabama and Miami. There's a reason that Miami was behind Alabama. They said, okay, one loss, and it happened with Florida State last year too. Alabama just had one less loss than Florida State, and they were in over them, right? So I think at one loss difference, the SEC gets the nod. And you saw that with Miami. At two losses of a difference, that's where I think the committee said, okay, at some point we got to, what if Alabama would, because Alabama could have lost to Georgia in that comeback, and I still would take Alabama over SMU head to head. And so there has to be a cutoff at some point.
We set the precedent today that playing in a conference championship, regardless of the strength of that conference, matters more than your regular season strength of schedule. And I think that is a very dangerous precedent to set. But, I think we're going to continue to tweak this model moving forward, right? This is the first year we did it. And I have more complaints than just Alabama being left out.
So, but going back one sec, if Alabama would have lost to Georgia and finished 8-4, would you still take them head to head against SMU?
Yeah.
So where's the line? What is and that's the problem. There is no answer. The problem is we have an imperfect system because Alabama could have lost to Georgia and been 8-4, and you and I would still both agree they'd probably be favored against SMU on a head to head. But how many say what?
I said, who wouldn't? Florida State.
Well, but at what point do you say, okay, you got to stop losing games? I mean, Alabama could have gone 6-6 this year, and they'd probably still be favored against SMU head-to-head.
Schedule, and that's the whole point. They play a tougher schedule. They're a better team, so their win-loss record looks worse, but they're still a better team because you gave them harder games. And at some point,
so why even play the games?
Harder games.
So we should just look at the strength of schedule at the beginning of the year and the recruiting rankings and just put those teams in. We shouldn't even play the regular season game.
Better job with scheduling parity, or we got to give more weight to the harder schedules.
Well, I think they do give more weight, and that's why a 3-loss Bama team is at. I think that's why a 3-loss Bama team is ahead of a 2-loss Miami team right now.
I also think we got to stop saying I understand it's a fine balance, right, between saying we don't want to make the conference championship games irrelevant, right? We don't want to make it so a team doesn't want to play in their conference championship game because it hurts their playoff chances. But I also don't think it's right to automatically say if you're in it, you're not going to drop out either. We're going to continue to tweak this. this is year one. Also, I would like to go on record as saying I didn't want to play off like this, but here we are.
Yeah, I think it's tough to think that you would penalize a team for playing in a conference championship, and even SEC coaches were saying that, right? I think that.
But if you play in a weaker conference, I don't know. It's got to be, you've got to look at all of these factors. You can't just make a blanket statement. Playing in it, you can't drop. I mean, what if SMU had lost?
I mean, SMU did drop. They just didn't drop out.
If they had lost by 20 points, are we having this conversation, do you think?
They probably get left out in that situation.
Yeah.
But to lose on a last second field goal, in a game that they looked really good for a half, I don't know. I don't.
Well, as I said at the very beginning of this, it's hard to argue that a 3-win team, belongs, right? Like a 3-loss team. I understand that it is not, the Alabama doesn't have a perfect argument. I just think we had a lot of imperfect solutions, and I think we picked the one that was more imperfect.
The real argument is not, to me, about Alabama SMU. It's about the system. Like, the system is stupid because Alabama, for all intents and purposes, Alabama should have been in. Like, Clemson shouldn't be in right now.
Well,
there shouldn't be auto bids. You can't be terrible all year and luck your way. I mean, Clemson was lucky that that Syracuse beat Miami the last week of the year, because if we'd have had an 11-1 Miami against an 11-1 SMU, that is much different, and we'd probably be having a different conversation about Miami's offense and the teams they've beaten, things like that. It'd be very different. In fact, in that situation, I think both the ACC teams get in that situation too. But for Clemson to luck their way into this thing. And then steal a bid. It's just like basketball where somebody steals a bid on the last day that had no chance of getting in. The argument to me really shouldn't even be SMU and Alabama. It's like Clemson doesn't deserve their way in. Yeah. Now, Clemson didn't set up the playoff. Alabama didn't set up the playoff. Well, the ACC and the Big Ten actually were really pro auto bids. We shouldn't have any auto bids. Just rank the best 12 teams and put them in. We
never agree, but I agree on this. It's asinine. So I was looking at the rankings. So when you get past 1 and 2, which Oregon and Georgia were 1 and 2, Texas was actually 3, but Texas gets the 5th bid, which, 5th place in the playoff.
That's stupid.
It is stupid. And
Boise State 3. I mean, can we not? What is that? Why is Boise State 3?
Penn State goes from 4, which is what they finished in the final rankings, but they're seeded 6th because that's the way that, it plays out. Notre Dame at 5th falls to 7th.
And if we're playing this game of who the better team is, who are you taking on a neutral site between Clemson and Boise State? I put Clemson ahead of Boise State right now. And I don't think Clemson should be in, but I'd put Clemson ahead of Boise. Why is Boise State 3? That's so dumb to me.
It is.
And maybe they go out and upset somebody. I don't know. But why is Boise State 3? That is so dumb.
Yeah, I think you rank them 1 through 12 and you give the buys to 1 through 4. And that's just the way that it works out. And conference champion, not conference champion. And conference championships, I think, should be looked at as almost like you play your way in, as opposed to you can play your way out, if that makes sense. And part of that has to do with the way that the committee phrase things week in and week out when they meet in these rooms and they release these polls. And we all know that the poll at the end of the year is going to look different than what they told us in the previous weeks, because we watched that happen with Florida State last year, right? This is all for TV, essentially. But stop telling us that you can't be penalized if you lose a game. Just tell us, hey, if you win, you're going to be in. If you win your conference champion, there's a great chance you're going to be in this playoff. Phrase it differently. I shouldn't be guaranteeing anything.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the auto bids because, again, Clemson finished 16th in the rankings. They shouldn't be in. Alabama's
11.
Yeah, the committee put Alabama in. Let's be honest.
Right.
The problem was that Clemson stole a bid, right? Correct. And so you shouldn't have auto bids. Again, I think it's dumb. There's no reason that, Boise State should be 3. I liked Arizona State yesterday. I thought they looked really fun, and maybe they can get hot in the play. Who knows? But they're not the 4 seed. Come on. I think they should be in. I think they should probably get to host. But I don't know that they should get a bye right now. Now, based on the way the bracket is set up, yeah, certainly. Yeah, they're one of the top 4 seeds. But I don't, I think that just now, again, this is the SEC and the Big Ten were the ones that fought so hard for the auto bids. And so that worked out really well for the Big Ten because they got one. And to me, the easiest path, and well, they got six. They got the 1 and the 6, but
well, I mean, they got teams in, which,
well, yeah, which probably is a larger conversation of like the fact that they didn't add really good teams that cannibalized the league. They added one team that was really good, and the rest of their league is, it's just much more top heavy, right? They've got 3 or 4 really good teams and then a bunch of crap, right?
Yep.
And the SEC has 7 or 8
really good teams,
average teams, yeah, and probably less elite, by SEC standard teams, but 7 or 8 teams that could win anytime, anywhere, at any point in the country. Right. So, hey, if you're watching this, do us a favor real quick and make sure you hit the subscribe button. We'll argue a little bit more here in a second, but we do appreciate those that are watching live